This video is an explanation of the reading comp passage about metabolism and temperature. This could be watched in conjunction with any question about the passage, and of course every question is explained in its own video explanation. I'll also say if you're doing multiple questions on this passage, I would urge you to answer all those questions first before watching this video, and that way you'll answer the questions with your own understanding of the passage. So let's take a look at this passage. It's very dense. Even though physiological and behavioral processes are maximized within relatively narrow ranges of temperature in amphibians and reptiles, individuals may not maintain activity at the optimal temperatures for performance because of the costs associated with doing so. Alternatively, activity can occur at suboptimal temperatures even when the costs are great. Theoretically, the cost of activities at suboptimal temperatures must be balanced by the gains of being active. Okay, so very interesting. Apparently, there are optimal temperatures for these amphibians and reptiles to do certain things. There's one really good temperature, and then the temperatures that are not so good, it's either too hot or too cold, and when it's too hot or too cold, there are greater metabolic costs. In other words, it costs them more energy, it's more of a struggle for them to do. Much in the same way, you think of a human walking a block on a pleasant day, it's going to be much harder in ultra hot weather or in freezing weather to walk that same block. It's going to be a harder task to walk one block depending on the temperature. We can adapt to a much larger range of temperatures than these poor reptiles and amphibians. So they give us an example in the middle of the paragraph. For instance, the leatherback sea turtle will hunt during the time of day in which krill are abundant, even though the water is cooler, and thus the turtle's body temperature requires greater metabolic activity. So it's more of a struggle for the turtle to hunt at that time because it's a bit too cold for him, but that's when he hunts because the krill, the food, is abundant. In general, however, the cost of keeping a suboptimal temperature for reptiles and amphibians is varied and not well understood. They include risk of predation, reduced performance, and reduced foraging success. And so if part of the cost can just be that it's a struggle, it doesn't feel good when it's too hot or too cold, but there are other risks, and that could be the principal risk. There's the risk of predation. In other words, the risk that some other predator could come along and eat you. For example, if the lizard can run fast at an optimal temperature and it runs much slower when it's too hot or too cold, well, if it's running slower, then that makes it easier for something else to catch it. And so risk of predation, reduced performance, or just reduced foraging success. They have less, it's harder for them to catch the food, again, if they're slower or something like this. Now the second paragraph. One reptile that scientists understand better is the desert lizard, which is active during the morning at relatively low body temperatures, usually 33 degrees Celsius, inactive during midday when external temperatures are extreme, and active in the evening when at body temperatures of 37 degrees Celsius. So the lizards engage in similar behavior in the morning and the evening, social displays, movements, and feeding. Metabolic rates and water loss are great, and sprint speed is lower in the evening when body temperatures are high. So in other words, it's much harder for the lizard to be out in the evening, and they're moving slower. So they're less likely to catch food, they're more likely to be preyed upon. So why would they be out in the evening? So we have thus the highest metabolic and performance costs of activity occur in the evening when the lizards have high body temperatures. However, the males that are active late in the day apparently have a higher mating success resulting from their prolonged social encounters. The costs of activity at temperatures beyond those optimal for performance are offset by the advantages gained by maximizing social interaction that ultimately impact individual fitness. So in other words, even though there are all kinds of disadvantages about being active in the evening, apparently the desert lizards that are active in the evening are the ones that are successful mating. and thus passing on their genes. So there's strong genetic selection pressures for them to have the perseverance to keep on being active in the evening, even though there's a strong metabolic cost. So the metabolic cost, you're going slower, you're losing water, but the payoff, getting to pass on your genes, that's a much bigger payoff, and it offsets any of the disadvantages.